All right, good day to everybody. My name is Joshua Clickman. I'm going to be talking about the moral decision of embryo adoption. I'm a student at Franciscan University working toward a master's degree in catechesis and evangelization. So we're going to talk about the moral decision of embryo adoption. So first of all, what is embryo adoption? Well, it's a part of the artificial reproductive technologies (ART). People using these in order to conceive a child when they can't. Husband and wife or a couple can't conceive a child in the marital act. An in vitro fertilization is a process where a technician removes the eggs and puts them together with semen in a laboratory. And then these are then inserted by a technician into the womb for implantation. The thing is and all this is morally illicit, but there's another moral problem that comes up, and that's the what to do with the embryos. Some people say use them maybe for research, which is unethical, or later them destroying them is unethical as well. So we're looking at this really is more like a rescue, where people are saying, "Hey, I want to give that embryo a chance to live." First person I'm going to look at is Charles Robinson, who takes a Thomistic approach. He wrote a Thomistic analysis of embryo adoption, and up front, he says that Thomistic principles will say that the proper use of generative potential is only in marital intercourse, and so therefore HET is morally impermissible. His analysis of the intentional act of the object. Robertson is looking at the intentional act and identifies the object of the species. Humans, first of all, we don't create our own ends from nothing. We have a role in the ordered universe, and the reproductive system is a part of this. And what is the good of it is for the existence of the species, and that's the formal object of desire, sexual desire there. Unlike hunger or thirst that help us to sustain, the generative power has the whole body as its subject, and it's not good. It's not for the good of the individual. You can go your whole life without reproducing, but the species would terminate. We talked about that in general in Thomistic studies anyway, and so he's Robertson here is bringing up those points. So it makes it a violation of the marital covenant because a husband and wife are pledged to be father and mother through each other. Robertson says that the presence or absence of the procreative conjugal act itself is the fundamental criteria by which to judge whether to permit or exclude artificial impregnation. Okay, and he quotes Aquinas directly, saying that the bond which comes to be between the spouses gives to them the objective and inalienable exclusive rights to each other to become father and mother through each other exclusively. So that makes embryo transfer a sexual sin, not one of lust, but really a disordered desire for a child, which is a violation of justice and a violation, and it's not ordered for the good of the species. Also, children have the right to be conceived and born within marriage and from marriage. So it has it's contrary to nature. You're using a technician rather than your spouse, and you're using a technique in a laboratory rather than the conjugal act. So it's contrary to nature, and that gives it the character of being evil. Robertson says that pregnancy is an activity of the generative faculty directed to the end of a mature human. The moral species of HET, heterologic embryo transfer, is the same as directing one's generative faculty to someone who is not one's spouse, making the embryo transfer itself morally illicit. And we can go beyond. Robertson doesn't exactly say, but you can't use an evil means. So if IVF is a morally evil means, we can't use that to try to achieve the good end, the good being rescuing the embryo. So next, I'll look at Colin Patterson's work, Embryo Adoption, some further considerations. Patterson takes a personalist understanding rather than a substantialist understanding, which we'll define in here in a couple minutes in the next article, actually. So Colin Patterson's Embryo Adoption, some further considerations. He takes a personalist perspective, but just like the Congregation of Doctrine of Faith documents says that there's negative judgment on embryo adoption. Personalist understanding of the beginning of life sheds light on why ART, artificial reproductive technology, should be rejected. Points out Germain Grisey, another familiar name for us, actually said the possibility of saving life is better than the certainty of death, therefore making potentially morally illicit the practice of HET. he goes through some of the arguments that we saw in the Thomistic approach, but we ponder the theory. I'm sorry. So we look at the personalist perspective. There are people and there are things. The personalist perspective sees people not as things, but in relation to one another. Unlike things, people only exist in relationship. And since a person cannot exist temporarily or prior to the existence of another person in direct relationship to other persons, you can't exist other than that. However, a thing can be temporary, and it can exist regardless of its relation to anything else. We see this most perfectly demonstrated and can get a lot of real energy to think about this when we think about the three persons and one nature of the Holy Trinity and the one person and two natures of Christ. So we can kind of see our relation with others and our relationship with God. If we were to use our relationship with God toward some other means than worshiping God, let's say you're going to use worship of God and my relationship with God and worship, but instead of doing it for God or for that relationship, I'm going to church for romantic interest or because it looks good socially. We see that this is a kind of an offense against the divine personhood to say you're going to church because some other reason other than worshiping God. Same applies for humans. Humans can never be seen as a means to an end. If we use somebody as a means to an end, we wrong them. And the full manifestation of personhood is expressed in loving loving others. And we can contrast this with the self-centered person or the toddler throwing a fit. We would say that personhood is limited. So Patterson really kind of give you that background of a personalist perspective, and he contrasts this with a substantialist perspective that he kind of says. Grisey is saying here that there's already an instantaneous ensoulment that's already happened. The egg's already fertilized, so therefore giving womb room to the embryo is a okay thing to do. But instead, Patterson says that personhood is a process, and it's a process of relationship, just like all our relationships. But he summarized Patterson by saying that personhood is a process, and that the fertilization is a process of implantation, and everything in the process of becoming a person should be respected. But the technological interventions control what belongs to divine freedom. So therefore, it compromises the dialogical relation with God. You're not allowing God into that relationship either. You're attempting to control it. So therefore, it makes, from this perspective, also morally illicit. Thomas Nelson is my third article here. He wrote Personhood and Embryo Adoption. Again, he's going to take the personalist perspective, but he's going to give us a whole other kind of angle on this. And what he's really doing is defending the fact that the lack of a relationship the genetic relationship between the embryo and the mother says that heterologic embryo adoption is illicit because there's a lack of relation. Whereas some other ethicist or practitioners say that you can't discriminate, you shouldn't discriminate based off the fact they're not related. He says, in fact, we should when we look at it from a personhood perspective. He's using Carl Wojtyla, who wrote a lot of the things we've studied, Veritatis Splendor and such. And we look at Carl Wojtyla's philosophical anthropology, and his notion of person says that the personal order is the proper plane for all matters of sexual morality. And so, like I said, for Nelson, it's immoral to practice HET because who is transferred into whom is a specifying circumstance of the objective act of transfer and nurturance of the embryo. So the relationship itself would make this immoral for a woman who's not the biological mother. He says that an individual, he quotes Richard of St. Victor saying that a person is an individual existence of a rational nature. And so this makes individual existence incommunicable. And this is key to personhood. People cannot be an instance of a kind. People have an infinity and cannot be reduced to a bodily existence. We see this Adam and Eve demonstrate this, that all bodies are not persons. Adam encounters many bodies, but it's not until his encounter with Eve that original solitude is ended, and personhood really develops there. And also only people can be capable of moral behavior. So our relationship and our personhood is fundamentally relational from one person to another. We see this in science a little bit, maybe imperfectly, but like in the case of identical twins, they're not the same person, nor Siamese twins. They share the same exact material, but they still remain distinct people. And relationships like people are not reducible to instances. So there's not wives or husbands or moms that are general, rather they are unique. This is really demonstrated, and this provides some more evidence here that the love between husband and wife is the exclusion of all other persons, and this demonstrates the essential incommunicability of persons inseparable from the body. It's not a type of love interchangeable with other bodies or types. Rather, each relationship and each person is unique and individual. He points out some other examples about the organ transplants and how organs aren't perfectly transplanted and stuff because there's a talking about the organ transplants. He kind of compares that a little bit to or contrasts it with the marital act, where actually the immune systems work together and the two become one flesh, and the immune system records the hormone of a partner for the rest of your life. So the point here is that the bodies of het are biologically and essentially unrelated. The embryo is meant for its mother, and they have an express unique personhood meant for each other, not simply some other. Pregnancy is a new and embodied union between mother and child, analogous in exclusivity to the marital union, essentially and incommunicably oriented. So in conclusion, Nelson says that the good ends of saving an embryo cannot justify the bad means of het ar, which is really kind of a Thomistic look at it as well. He says that embryos cannot be transferred to, and it violates the personal order. They can't be transferred into an animal or artificial womb either. However, he does say that it's not excluded. It's not exclusive. If the biological mother wants to do this, he says it's not necessarily illicit. So after reading all these articles, I was kind of all over the place. And I've demonstrated some of my thought throughout, and I really used the readings that we had throughout this course to kind of shape my thinking. So I say the embryo adoption or rescue, whatever you want to call it, is immoral for the simple fact that replacing the husband for a technique and for a technician. I'm sorry, the husband for a technician and a technique for a lab technique for the process of fertilization and implantation is immoral. Moral problems arise from experience. Demonstrate the moral problems that come from the experience demonstrate that the practice must be stopped immediately. And the desire of infertile couples to bear a child is a beautiful reflection of their desire for one another, affirming that they want to materialize their love for one another into another. That's very beautiful. We have to recognize how great this desire is and be sensitive to it. But we cannot allow technology to supplant the role that husband and wife have in allowing God to be the author of life. Also, the desire to rescue embryos affirms the value of human life from conception to natural death. However, rescuing embryos does make us complicit in ART, and we will certainly encourage couples to continue this immoral practice, especially knowing that someone will use their leftover embryos. So the tragical reality here is that we have to choose between the evil of allowing the embryos to perish or het ar. Allowing the embryos to perish makes our society complicit in the creation of life without the intent to foster life. Also, the use of het ar violates the dignity of the personhood. It violates the sacredness of marriage, and it represents a disordered desire for the child. That's my belief. You can see that's mostly a summary in agreement with the three works I selected from. And the only person I would disagree with in some part, and maybe not entirely, but Thomas Nelson, who says it would be possibly okay for the mom to rescue her embryo. I agree from his angle of personhood. It doesn't seem to be directly an affront to the personhood because of the relation what he's looking at. But you're still using an immoral technique, and you can't use a bad means to try to achieve a good ends. And I don't think the principle of double effect would apply here either, as we talked about in the course as well. This frequently gets overly used and really misapplied. So I don't think we could use the principle of double effect. I think it's just a fact. IVF is immoral, and we shouldn't use it even for the case of rescue. So I hope that all made sense, and hopefully the outline will help you go through that and see how I develop my thought. Thanks, and have a great day.